Welcome back to the Yarn Stash Management series. Today we are in episode number 4. So if you haven't started from the beginning, go back to the first episode because, well, it makes a lot more sense. This isn't just about my journey. This is about sharing with you some of the things that I've learned along the way. I sort of nerd out on organization kind of stuff, so this is totally my jam. And hopefully I can share some good stuff with you. So episode 1 was our audit, kind of figuring out what we had and what the ground rules were, all of that kind of stuff. Episode 2 was the big de-stash. That's where we purged all of those things that we didn't need in our lives anymore. Episode 3 was all about the storage, the physical storage, where things were going to be kept, where they were going to be stored, how we were going to access them on a regular basis. Now we are to episode number 4, and this is all about keeping an inventory. Now, this inventory can either be a physical pencil paper kind of inventory, old school, or we can also talk about some digital inventory items. And I'm going to share with you pros and cons to all of this and what has traditionally worked for me. But it is really important for you to figure out what's going to work for you because this is all about maintenance. And we're going to talk a little bit about that at the very end. So let's go ahead and dive in. Why the heck do we want to keep an inventory of the yarn? I mean, we can just look through the bins, right? We can just kind of browse through what it is that we have, the physical stash. And that is extremely appealing. Unfortunately, it can be overwhelming. It can be messy. It can, just kind of put things into chaos on a regular basis. And frankly, when you're at the store wondering if you should buy another skein of that one yarn, you're not going to have a clue because you don't know what is in your stash at home. So let's talk about some of those actual concrete kind of benefits. The first ones we're going to talk about really focus on the idea of minimizing our purchasing. Like, how do we avoid splurging on more yarn when one of our goals is to not spend more money on yarn? So the inventory is going to help you do that because it's going to help you avoid some of that impulse buying rather than thinking, oh, that is gorgeous yarn. I want to buy some of that. You already know that you have some of that gorgeous yarn or something very similar to it in your stash because you have an inventory of that stash, right? That is one of those things that's going to be really critical in keeping us, and I say us because I'm talking to myself too, keep us on track with what our goals are. Another good reason for this is because it helps us to avoid the duplicate buying. This is like, I hear this on videos all of the time. People did not realize that they had a certain yarn in their stash. And as they're kind of going through it, they're like, I have way more of this than I thought, but I keep buying it because I didn't know I had it. So if you have an inventory of your stash, then you're going to know whether or not that's in there so you don't have to buy more of it just to make sure. And I love this one, and this is the yardage sort of measurement. My stash tells me how much yardage I have of various types of yarn. So if I'm thinking about a certain project, I can actually look at how much yarn I have of a certain yardage rather than having to go through my stash and then just do a mental calculation, which mental calculations with math are not something I should be, trying on a regular basis. I could break my brain doing that. It's, not a good thing. So I really want to know what yardage of yarn I have so I know whether or not I need to buy an extra skein or it's there already, or maybe I need to look at a different yarn to work with on that particular project, all of that kind of good stuff. When I have the numbers, I can figure those things out. And then I don't know about you, but I dig the gamification aspect of it. When I track this digitally, you could certainly do this with paper and pencil, but it's a whole lot easier when you do it digitally. Then I can see how much yarn comes in and how much yarn goes out, how much I'm using. I love to know those numbers. I just find that to be satisfying in a whole different way. So I can say, oh, on an average basis, I use about 600 grams of yarn per month. That's good to know, because then I can say, if I want to decrease my stash, then I need to be using up more than I am buying. I must buy less than 600 grams if I'm using 600 grams on average. I like using those numbers. It keeps me, I have fun with it, but it also helps to keep me accountable. And that's something that you can do much more readily when you have a form of inventory. Sure, you can see, is your stash, if you just have a couple of stash spots, you can see if it's growing or decreasing. For sure, that works. But if you have a larger stash, or your stash is kind of stored all over the place, that gets harder and harder to do. Now let's talk about some of the benefits that aren't just the nerdy no-buy goals kind of aspect, but help with our creative inspiration. And this is one of those things that I really love about the inventory. One is, I'm always like, what color should I buy? Okay, so let me give you a scenario here. I get an email and there is a yarn that's on sale that I like to use or that I really want to try. And then I'm sitting there, what color should I buy? I don't know. I think I have enough of that color, but maybe I haven't used that color in a while. Well, the system that I use allows me to sort by color, so I can say, I don't have very much orange. I don't have very much orange because I don't buy a lot of orange, because I wouldn't make a lot of things in orange. That's not the point. The point is, I could then say, I've got a ton of blue, I have a lot of purple, I probably could use a little bit more red. Let me see what color I probably should lean into for buying this particular new yarn. It also lets me kind of visualize what seasons, like maybe I have a lot of red worsted because that makes sense for Christmas type projects, but I don't have a lot of red fingering, which may be really good for a summer top that's a little bit more, evening oriented versus the bright colors that I might get during the day. It allows me to kind of think through that creative process when I know what yarn colors that I have in what weights and all that good stuff. The other reason I love to have the inventory is because it allows me to kind of shop from my inventory, the digital inventory, rather than just digging through everything. I often will go to the digital inventory first and say, what yarns do I have that have enough yardage for the project that I'm looking to do? And then I will put hands on that yarn and really kind of give it an evaluation. Now, for some people, this doesn't work. They would much rather do the hands-on. They want to select the yarn, and then maybe they'll go to find a project that it works for them. Either way is totally okay, but this just gives you some options, gives you some variables, gives you something else to explore, which is always good for creativity. Sometimes we get creatively stuck and we need to mix up what it is that we're doing. So if you've already tracked things, it gives you alternative ways to explore new concepts or ideas. If you haven't tracked those things, then you are going to be limited to what you've always done. Just saying. And having that inventory allows you to start projects more quickly, because if you get inspiration, like let's say you just one of your favorite designers just came out with a brand new project and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally have to make that. What kind of yarn does it use? If you don't have that specific yarn in your stash, at least you can look at what yarns you have in your stash and see whether or not one of those would work for this project, which allows you to start that even quicker. If you have to rely on just kind of browsing what is in your bins, you might miss the fact that you have a very comparable DK weight yarn that will be perfect for this project. And rather than ordering more, you get to start today. That's like, yay, right? I love that. Okay. So let's move on here and talk a little bit about different systems. And I'm going to give you some examples. We're not doing a tutorial here because most of these, they're either too intensive for a tutorial or they're easy enough that you don't need a tutorial. So I'm going to give you some resources for tutorials, but I'm not going to do the tutorial right here. Did I say tutorial enough times? Good. Okay, check. The first option is the analog method. This is pencil and paper. There are books that you can get, journals from Amazon, like this one right here. Yes. There are printable pages on Etsy that you can get. There are all kinds of tools and systems and places. You don't even need them. You could just get a spiral notebook and write down the yarn name, the weight, how much you have, any details that you want to keep track of. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of people do with the physical sort of pencil and paper systems is they'll take a snip of the yarn and tape it to their journal so they actually can see what the yarn looks like. That way, when they're going through their stash, it's easy to kind of make that association. So that is one option. If you look on Etsy, and I'll link to the search that I use for Etsy, there are so many fun, creative ways of doing physical inventories, whether it's like a recipe card or a sample book, and none of those are right or wrong. It's just what is going to work for you. One of the things that I used to teach when I taught productivity and time management was find a system that is good enough. There is no perfect. Find what is good enough for you and make it work. Stick to it. Give it a good old college try and give it your all, even if you're like, well, but it could be better, because we get into this cycle of trying to try something new and then something new and then something new. And by the time we're done, we're just spending more time than we're actually saving. Okay, so the yarn journals are very effective if you are very tactile. You like to feel things. You like the physical process. If you have a physical calendar that you use, then this is probably going to be a better fit for you. But if your calendar is digital, you're probably not going to love this system. Just saying. I could be wrong. There's always exceptions, but, keep that in mind. Yeah, so I'll link to a couple of resources below and you can kind of check those out and see which ones you like. Some of these do have affiliate codes. You're not paying any more. If I get a tiny little commission on it, it's going to be pennies, I promise. The next option is spreadsheets, and these would be like Google Sheets or an Excel spreadsheet, and these are really beneficial for somebody that likes all the numbers, that likes to make charts, that likes to have way more data than even I probably like to have. If you love to manipulate the data to see what kind of things are coming up for you, then this might be a great option. Those that it's not going to be a good option for are individuals who aren't as data driven, but maybe much more visually driven. They want to see the pictures. They want to, know what kind of inspiration. They want a Pinterest board. They don't want a spreadsheet. There, again, I've got a couple of resources that I'll link to below that kind of give you some examples. One of them is free, one of them is a spreadsheet available on Etsy, and you can kind of take a look at some of those spreadsheet options and see which ones work for you. Now, for those that want the data, but they want a very easy ramp up to get started, then I strongly suggest using Ravelry. If you're not familiar with Ravelry, I've got a whole playlist of Ravelry videos, and I'll make sure to link to that below. But Ravelry is a tool for knitters and crocheters to get started. You can store your entire stash in Ravelry. And the great thing is, they already have 90% of the yarns that are available out there in their system. So you can type in the name of the yarn and it fills in all of the details. All you have to say is how much you have, how much you spent, and where you bought it. And you don't even have to do that much if you don't want. You can really scale up and make this a lot easier process overall if you use a tool like Ravelry. Now, there are some limitations to Ravelry. It does not play well on mobile devices. It's not mobile optimized, and there is no app. So if you tend to rely heavily on your phone, this is probably not going to be an ideal system for you because it's just very limited in that regard. Also, if you have concerns about privacy or anything like that, it is a site that is out there. It has a community element. So if you want to keep all of that information private, then that's probably not a good use for you as well. Now, the system that I have used now for probably about a year and a half, and I find it personally the most fulfilling, the most satisfying, is a tool called Notion. Notion is a free, they've got paid levels, but I just use the free version. It's a database system with a visual component to it. It's an extremely powerful tool. It is not limited to the Yarny community. In fact, it almost has more of a business feel to it. You can use it for business. You can use it for your personal life. You can use it for recipes. You can use it for so many different things. And that's one of the aspects that I really like about Notion. Now, there are some amazing templates out there, and one that I've been using for a long time, and then one that was recently just shared by MC Blame the Knots. She's got a YouTube channel. I'll make sure to link to that. She actually has a free version of her Notion template and a paid version of the Notion template if you want a little bit more detail, a little bit more data. But some of the things that I like best about Notion, it can be very visual and data driven. So you get a little bit of both worlds, and it allows you to play and adjust things and personalize things in a much more detailed fashion. It gives you a lot more control over what it is that you're tracking. And I love that. I'm a control nerd. I love to have as much control as I can. That being said, there is definitely a learning curve to this software. So if you don't want to have to learn something new, if that's not your cup of tea to learn new software, then this is not going to be the best option for you. I would go with one of the other methods for sure. But I will link to MC's video down below so you can watch that, and as well as another place that I got my tutorial, which is an Etsy link, or not my tutorial, sorry, my template. Because Notion, basically what you do is you can either build it yourself, which is totally okay if you can nerd out on that stuff. I don't. I want a starting place. So you can get either a free or a paid template that you put over the system, and then that template gives you all of the things, but then you can modify the template from there. So gives you at least a good place to start. Now, here's the kicker. None of these tools are going to be very beneficial to you unless you have a way to maintain them. And that sometimes requires some commitment. Here's what I do. I have my Sundays set aside for my cleaning and organizing and updating these kind of things. So, Sunday is the time in my craft room where I get down and dirty. I put things away. Literally every Sunday, I have to do this because my craft room just looks like a yarn explosion because of the creative process that I go through. But anyway, and then I update my database on Sundays. So it's not something that I'm very good at doing on a daily basis, but I make sure that I have that day set aside at least once a week to go in and update the things that need to be updated on those. So set up some things for yourself, some habits or some things that are going to help you to maintain the system, because nothing is good enough if it's not maintained. You may as well not even start if you know you're not the person that's going to maintain it. So, and you know what? That's totally okay. You can let yourself off the hook if that's not you, if that's not the way your brain works. Sometimes we have to let go of who we want to be and just accept who we know we are. And that's okay too. So that's the exercise today. I want to know if you are going to start your own yarn inventory, if you already have a yarn inventory, what kind of systems you use, what you like to do. And then next week, we are going to really talk about how to maintain our no-buy goals. So now that we have the yarn stash purged, organized, and inventoried, how are we going to maintain those goals to not buy more yarn? That's what I want to talk about next week. So hopefully you'll stay tuned and you'll see us next week. And Farah, frog us out of here.